Thank you for joining us for today's Chicago Research Workshop on Reciprocal Research Principles. Today, we will be joined by Karen Canales Salas, Environmental Justice Education Coordinator for the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, also known as LVEJO. The mission of LVEJO is to organize with the community to accomplish environmental justice in Little Village and achieve the self-determination of immigrant, low-income, and working-class families. Their vision is to build a sustainable community that promotes the healthy development of youth and families, provides economic justice, and practices participatory democracy and self-determination. During today's session, we'll be focusing on LVEJO's academic partnership guidelines and will provide insight into how to build more reciprocal partner relationships while conducting academic research. Thank you for joining us today, Karen.
Yeah, thank you. And hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm really excited to host this conversation. This is actually the first time that we've had a workshop on this, so I'm really excited. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and start presenting. Okay. Yeah, so, really quickly, I wanted to give an introduction to me a little bit. I do also have a really quick check-in activity for us, but I want to talk to you all about, some of the ways that we do research, right? And that we consider some of the things that we consider when we partner with institutions, academic institutions. So again, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Karen, and I've been working with LVEJO now. I just celebrated my 8-year anniversary there this past month in April. So I shared my email as well in case you all want to share it or keep it and contact me for any other questions. Okay, so I wanted to share this picture of some of the staff. We have grown a lot since this picture, and this was pre-COVID. So we've definitely had a lot more employees, just hired since COVID to address different needs. But at the end of the day, we're just a group of passionate individuals fighting the destruction of Mother Earth in our communities, right? And so that looks different in many different, areas and areas of work, and just also different harms that are done to communities in different ways, right? And so it's really all encompassing, and I'll talk a little bit more about environmental justice and, more specifically about our work. But I do want to have a check-in activity with you all. I got this little talk activity for my daughter and I, which it's just a bunch of questions in different categories. So if it's okay with you all, I'm gonna go ahead and pick hopes and dreams. And I wanna know, and you all can share out loud or go ahead and just feel free to put it in the chat. What's one thing you can do today to create a better tomorrow? Let me see if I can put the chat somewhere. Okay, yeah. So the question is, what's one thing you can do today to create a better tomorrow? And I put it on the chat. So go ahead and take like a minute or two to think about it. And when you're ready to share.
I can say something. This is Chris. I'm actually in the middle of selling the condo that I've had for a long time because I am ultimately trying to be more flexible and more able to be close to my family. My parents are getting older and they need more support. And so my kind of long-term plan and the better tomorrow I'm hoping is one when I'm a lot closer to my family and able to be more direct support for them. I'm the oldest, so I got to do that.
Thank you for sharing. Tess, I see that you shared avoid driving and ride your bike to work. Yes. Erin, did you want to share?
Yeah. I was going to say like tending to a connection or like deepening a connection with somebody.
That's a good one. Thank you for sharing. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for joining. So my name is Karen. I'm going to be leading a discussion on research principles and how LVEJO, the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, kind of looks at research and academic partnerships. Right now, we are just doing a check-in activity, which is, I'm just asking folks, what's one thing that you can do today to create a better tomorrow? And so if you have anything that you'd like to share, also no pressure, I know you just joined.
Let me think about that for a little bit for a sec.
Okay, no problem. Let me know whenever you're ready to share, and if you want to just raise your hand, I should be able to see the reaction. But if it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and move on, just in the interest of time and making sure that we kind of have good discussions and more opportunities to share, right? So more generally, the organization, right, as Tess described our mission, our organization really kind of has these two documents and set of principles that kind of guide our work. And so the first one is the HEMES Principles of Democratic Organizing. And then the second one is the Principles of Environmental Justice. And so there are other kind of iterations of this as well. There's the youth principles of environmental justice, because there's also, we have to be cognizant that there are different groups that are impacted differently by, some of these issues. And so young people got together and, wrote a set of principles specifically around environmental justice. So I want to talk a little bit more about the HEMES Principles of Democratic Organizing, and we will have a chance to, be a little bit interactive with it. So let me pull up the principles. Are you all able to see them?
Yep, I can see him.
Okay. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so that folks are able to read them. Awesome. And so the HEMES Principles of Democratic Organizing, like I said, are, a set of principles that our organization really aligns well with, and something that, we hope other organizations, but also individuals kind of take it upon themselves to really think about and reflect how to incorporate some of these principles in their day-to-day, right? And so the HEMES principles in particular were put together by a group called the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice in HEMES, New Mexico in the 90s. And so when we also think about the movement for environmental justice, it's all encompassing, really. As I mentioned, our work isn't just about, fighting industrial monsters, right? It's a lot more about really getting at the root cause of some of these systems and the ways in which institutions cause more than just industrial harm to our communities, but really, toxic rooted harm and in institutional ways. And so this group got together in the 90s. A whole bunch of activists, right, from around the world were kind of noticing that we were kind of going through some of the same things, right? And so I don't know if folks wanna, I know we have a small group, if folks wanna take turns reading them, or I can also kind of like read some of the ones that are more, that I resonate with more. I don't know if folks are willing to popcorn style this.
Sure. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Should I start with number 1, be inclusive?
If you want, yeah, I
Okay.
can read the introduction when we're done.
Oh, okay. If we hope to achieve just societies that include all people in decision making and assure that all people have an equitable share of the wealth and the work of this world, then we must work to build that kind of inclusiveness into our own movement in order to develop alternative policies and institutions to the treaties, policies under neoliberalism. This requires more than tokenism. It cannot be achieved without diversity at the planning table, in staffing and in coordination. It may delay achievement of other important goals. It will require discussion, hard work, patience, and advanced planning. It may involve conflict, but through this conflict, we can learn better ways of working together. It's about building alternative institutions, movement building, and not compromising out in order to be accepted into the anti-globalization club.
Thank you.
I'm happy to read number 2.
Go for it.
Emphasis on bottom-up organizing. To succeed, it is important to reach out into new constituencies and to reach within all levels of leadership and membership base of the organizations that are already involved in our networks. We must be continually building and strengthening a base which provides our credibility, our strategies, mobilizations, leadership development, and the energy for the work we must do daily.
Thank you.
And I'd love to read number 3. That's one that's really crucial to the work we try to do here. Number 3, let people speak for themselves. We must be sure that relevant voices of people directly affected are heard. Ways must be provided for spokespersons to represent and be responsible to the affected constituencies. It is important for organizations to clarify their roles and who they represent and to assure accountability within our structures.
Thank you.
I can read the 4th one. Work together in solidarity and mutuality. Groups working on similar issues with compatible visions should consciously act in solidarity, mutuality, and support each other's work. In the long run, a more significant step is to incorporate the goals and values of other groups with your own work in order to build strong relationships. For instance, in the long run, it is more important that labor unions and community economic development projects include the issue of environmental sustainability in their own strategies, rather than just lending support to the environmental organizations. So communications, strategies, and resource sharing is critical to help us see our connections and build on these.
Thank you. Anybody want to do number 5? Want to repeat number 5? I can do it. So number 5 is build just relationships among ourselves. We need to treat each other with justice and respect, both on an individual and organizational level in this country and across borders. Defining and developing just relationships will be a process that won't happen overnight. It must include clarity about decision-making, sharing strategies, and resource distribution. There are clearly many skills necessary to succeed, and we need to determine the ways for those with different skills to coordinate and be accountable to one another. Anybody want to do number 6?
Sure, I'm happy to do number 6, commitment to self-transformation. As we change societies, we must change from operating on the mode of individualism to community-centeredness. We must walk our talk. We must be the values that we say we're struggling for, and we must be justice, be peace, be community.
Thank you. Yeah, and so, to give a little bit more of a formal, context, all these beautiful principles are just 6 of them, right? 6 principles that everyone kind of got together on and agreed on them, right? And so 40 people of color and European American representatives met in Jemez, New Mexico for the working group meeting on globalization and trade. The HEMES meeting was hosted by the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice with the intention of hammering out common understandings between participants from different cultures, politics, and organizations. The following HEMES principles were adopted by the participants, right? And so again, it's people from around the country, right, from around the world got together and we're noticing these same similar patterns, and got together and put these principles to that really resonate with a lot of aspects of our lives, right? And again, something that I want to invite you all to kind of think about is how do these principles resonate in our day-to-day, right? And so I do have a Jamboard that we can kind of give a little bit more feedback on and spend a little bit of time. But also for you all to kind of take back and kind of think about, reflect, feel free to use it however and whenever, you know, you all want to reflect back on it. I think it's always, you know, one of the things with these principles, right, is that there's this, it's circular, right? It's an invitation for us to be critical of ourselves, to transform how we think, how we feel, and do that in a just way, right? Where we're thinking about other people. And so I put the Jamboard link, let me know if it works, on the chat so we can share, and it doesn't necessarily have to be right now. Okay, awesome. Chris, I see you were able to get in. And so if you're able to get in to the Jamboard, we have 2 slides. The first one is just for the HEMES principles. And then the second one, I'll go over it a little bit, but it's the principles for environmental justice. So we'll go through some of those as well. Do folks want to take a few minutes now to go through the HEMES principles and do some reflection?
Sure, I think that sounds good. I just actually am needing access on my end. It says request access.
Yeah, I said I was in, but I lied. I opened it and then I got the same screen that tested. It was like, nope. There you go.
Okay, never mind.
That's
Let
the
me
one.
see. Maybe now it works.
Oh, now I'm really in.
Yes, I'm in as well.
There we go. I see a penguin, an elephant, and an alligator. Awesome. So go ahead and take some time to, and I can pull these up and also share the link with you all. I have these printed and shared with, you know, with young people. I have these on my desk. They're just a really great tool to live by. I love this. So number 3, right? Letting people speak for themselves. I think that's, yeah, let's keep thinking about that, right? And let's keep reflecting that. I also want to read the principles of environmental justice too, before we really start to dig into some of these. Number 6, yeah. Number 6 also has a lot to unpack there, right? It can be challenging to do that work of self-transformation in the, in the society that we live in, right? Because we live in an individualistic society, and so much of it is like pick yourself up from the bootstraps kind of mentality that does not work, right? And so definitely always worth fighting, right? To have more community centered and like community, community structures versus hierarchical structures. Yeah, and that's a really great question, right? What does that look like in practice? Are there great examples of how to do this without without capitalism, without liberalism, neoliberalism, right? And so, yeah. Yes. Awesome. Thank you everyone for sharing your feedback. Definitely, I want to invite you all to use this link, right? Feel free to share it with your group as well. I also want us to have some time to talk about it and look at the principles of environmental justice, right? How is it that they kind of work together? And, what are some of the ways, some of the things that we can, take from this to live through. And so the principles of environmental justice, same thing, right? A group of people got together. So the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit was held in October of 1991. And so since then, right, these principles have been really helpful for a lot of organizations and just activists in general. And so I'm going to go ahead and read the introduction, and we can read a few of them. We don't have to go through all of them. I'll also share the link in the chat so that you all are able to kind of keep that as a reference. And so we, the people of color, gathered together at this multinational People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit to begin to build a national and international movement of all peoples of color to fight the destruction and taking of our lands and communities, to hereby reestablish our spiritual interdependence to the sacredness of our Mother Earth, to respect and celebrate each of our cultures, languages, and beliefs about the natural world, and our roles in healing ourselves, to ensure environmental justice, to promote economic alternatives which would contribute to the development of environmentally safe livelihoods, and to secure our political, economic, and cultural liberation that has been denied for over 500 years of colonization and oppression, resulting in the poisoning of our communities and land and the genocide of our peoples, to affirm and adopt these principles of environmental justice. And so whoever wants to go ahead and take number 1, or whichever one you want to pick.
I really like number 1. So environmental justice affirms the sacredness of Mother Earth, ecological unity, and the interdependence of all species, and the right to be free from ecological destruction.
Thank you.
I really like number 7, actually. Environmental justice affirms the right of all workers to a safe and healthy work environment without being forced to choose between an unsafe livelihood and unemployment. It also affirms the right of those who work at home to be free from environmental hazards. And that was number 8, sorry.
Thank you.
I think number
Um,
9 is so important here. And oh, I'm sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'll read number 7. Environmental justice demands the right to participate as equal partners at every level of decision making, including needs assessment, planning, implementation, enforcement, and evaluation.
And I was going to read number 9 because I just think it's so relevant here in Chicago. Environmental justice protects the rights of victims of environmental injustice to receive full compensation and reparations for damages, as well as quality health care.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And then I'll read my favorite one, which I also have on the slides, which is number 16, right? Environmental justice calls for the education of present and future generations, which emphasizes social and environmental issues based on our experience and an appreciation of our diverse cultural perspectives. Anybody want to read another one? Or I do have a Jamboard too, where we can reflect a little bit more about these. And so I think it's the same link. If you just slide on over to number 2, you know, again, one of the things with us is just the reflection is transformation, right? It's an opportunity for growth. And so really take in the principles that we just read, the ones that resonated with you, and think about how you can use that in your day-to-day, how you can use that in your workplace, how you can transform your workplace, right, to reflect some of these principles. And yeah, I invite you all to think about that same question. How do these things look in practice? How can they look like in practice? And how can you make sure that you are the one kind of leading that work to change some of these systems, right? Yeah, number 11, right? I think in general, right, like what can we do as individuals and how can we push our places of work, our places of study, our places of worship to include and acknowledge Indigenous peoples, right? I think there's no other way of saying that, right? How is it that we can make more space for Indigenous folks?
Well, and it's like that, a few different parts of that too, at least for me. On the one hand, kind of ignoring the history, and on the other hand, pretending that Indigenous communities are nothing but historic, as opposed to among us right now, and activists and working to struggle against ongoing colonization and forms of cultural genocide. Just
Yes, thank you for sharing. Thank you, everyone. I definitely agree, right? Number 12, same. I think it's number 12 and number 1, right? Like there's no other question, but like, how do we figure out how to live in these worlds that we are creating with the natural worlds that we were given, right? And so definitely we don't have all the answers, right? These are principles to live by. These are kind of tools to help guide our work. And definitely, you know, I again encourage you all to keep thinking about this and keep reflecting what this means to you on a daily basis. Yes, ecological unity. I love that. So I did want to kind of go back and talk a little bit more specifically, right, about how do we think about these principles in practice, particularly with our research, right, our academic partnerships and the ways that we do research and that we invite research with academia, right, and other institutions. And so LVEJO, we recognize that we need university-based research projects, right? More than just university-based research projects, just resources in general, right? And so we've also worked with high school students that are, you know, classroom-based research projects, right? But again, the fact that it's a university-based research project does give it a little bit of that credibility that unfortunately, you know, gives us more opportunities, right? And so I do want to talk about the conflict that I have there too, which we'll go into. But like I mentioned, right, these guidelines that I'm going to be describing are really rooted in our work around the principles of democratic organizing, the HEMES principles of democratic organizing, and also the principles of environmental justice, right? And like I said, I do a lot of the youth work for the organization. So there is a youth specific principle, set of principles for environmental justice as well that are very, very helpful. Aaron, I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering, can you share an anecdote of like what some of this looks like in practice? Because I guess it just seems a little bit fuzzy to me still of like, well, you know, what does this look like, or what are ways it can manifest in our communities?
Are you talking about like a particular, like you want an example of a research project or?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can go into those. Let me kind of go through our guidelines a little bit and like describe them, and then talk a little bit about some of the different projects that we've worked with already, or that we've worked on. And so, yeah, we do ask that, you know, and this just particularly from an organizational point of view, right? There is, we do have to consider the community point of view, right? And so when working with an organization, LVEJO does believe that, you know, we need to be held accountable to the research, right? But also, how does that research change? And I'll talk a little bit more about that as the slides kind of go, as I kind of go through the slides. But yeah, right. Let me go into these guidelines that we kind of develop. And so we have 6 different partnership guidelines that we ask of specifically academia, right? So we want to consider the research design, staff capacity and compensation, fundraising, intellectual property, student intern management, and memorandum of agreement. And so what do each of those kind of look like? In terms of research design, we really believe that you know, community-based research projects are only done well when they're done through a collaborative process from the beginning, right? And so everything from like research questions, methods of data collection, and in some cases, even the research writing itself should be done collaboratively with LVEJO, should be inviting to research participants as well. And so the reason why that's important is because research participants are usually the ones that we're extracting knowledge from, right, for our research. And so we want to make sure that they also have a space in the actual research design. And yeah, and you know, again, for the organization, it's really important for us, like we are not gonna agree to work on something that was developed without our knowledge, right? And so it doesn't make sense, right? Like when we're talking about being inclusive, we're talking about also asking for consent and everyone making sure that we know what the work is and what it's gonna, you know, encompass. And by that, I mean our capacity and making sure that there's compensation for, for the research teams, but also for the research participants. And so researchers, we believe that researchers must account for the fact that, organizations in general, community-based organizations are more than likely severely under-resourced and almost always will prioritize community organizing, right? And so we definitely want to prioritize and support community-based research projects that consider compensating staff for capacity, for their time, for their knowledge, and for sharing all their wonderful resources, right? And so and it doesn't just stop at the community organization that you're partnering with. It also includes, as I mentioned, research participants at times. I know, for example, when we've done community science projects, we always offer stipends and or bus cards, lunch cards, whatever it might be, right? Something to make sure that we're compensating people for their time, which is really, really important. And I think, again, right, from the organizational point of view, it's really, really important for there to be transparency around budgets. Again, LVEJO, we need to know what we're doing, right? And so this just from an organizational point of view, that budgets have to be really transparent. And I think across the board, right, the projects, research projects and everything that kind of involves research projects should be pretty transparent to everyone involved. And so intellectual property is another big thing, right? And so we definitely recognize that intellectual property is not something that we can own, right? But in any case, we do also want to make sure that we are not stripped away from the work that community members do work, right? And so, or do. And so with that being said, right, that also has a lot to do with like, how are you sharing research and that intellectual property with research participants as well, right? Are they able to access whatever article was published, right? Is that article free? Is it are you able to translate it? All these different things, right, that are that we have to take into consideration. And then again, this is really like specific to like partnership with an organization, right? But student intern management. So LVEJO does support the participation of university students, and again, particularly students of color, right? And community-based research projects in the cases where student interns will be utilized for conducting research. University researchers would be prepared to discuss how they'll be compensated and managed throughout the research process. So again, we say that a lot because we do get, offered interns that are probably not paid, or, they just get college credit. And that is something that we ask, is that, there be consideration to pay interns, right, for their time and for their, for their time and their capacity. And so the last one is the Memorandum of Agreement, right? A lot of the times, and the reason why a lot of these guidelines were put in place is because, organizations just would not want to do or to align with us, right? And so a Memorandum of Agreement is just making sure that, everyone's on the same page, right? And it's so important that folks are able to, or willing to even, come together and to resolve, whether it be conflict, or even just like, how do you handle accountability, right? Like all these different things, right? And so it's really, really important for us to, again, a Memorandum of Agreement is just to like kind of get on the same page, right? And everyone that's involved in the research should understand and just be on the same page. The last thing I kind of wanted to kind of wrap up with, right, is like sustainable research, right? When we're thinking about research, is how we also want to think about how we're building relationships, right? research shouldn't just be like, oh, I need to get this done for my degree. I need to get this done for this. I need to get this, whatever. Like, no, it should be building a relationship, right? Research has to be intentional. And so when your research is intentional, you're also intentional about those relationships that you're initiating, right? Because whether it's working with the community organization or even community members directly, right? It's still somebody that you're meeting, right? And that you're asking for their time and their knowledge. And so how can we think about creating more sustainable ways of relationship building in our research? Investments, right? How do you invest your time and money into the communities that you're researching about, right? Again, like not, research shouldn't be extractive, right? It should not be extractive at all. And so how do we share? How do we invest? And it doesn't just have to be money, right? It could be other kind of skills, right? How can you share anything that you have and, you know, really invest in the work that you're doing and in the research that you're doing. Number 3, I put validate and sharing all forms of knowledge. And so this is really important to us because it's, you know, we understand that knowledge isn't only held in academia, right? And there is this kind of like elitism, right, with academia, and once people get a degree, right, like, you know, you somehow know a little bit more than other people, but like that's not really the case, right? And so we want to make sure that that we recognize and that we validate all forms of knowledge and expertise. You know, specifically when we're doing research, because again, if there's research being done in a community, you're there researching and extracting knowledge and extracting information, and we need to start shifting that narrative, right, into validating, right, and sharing knowledge. And so then the last kind of you know, way that I see sustainable research being done is inviting and having opportunities for accountability and growth, right? Are you questioning, or not necessarily questioning, but are you thinking about how are you transforming this research? How is this research transforming you? Or, you know, any issues that any issues that you might see it transforming. How are you inviting yourself to be held accountable to these changes? How are you inviting, you know, research participants to hold you accountable? All these different kind of things are important to think about when we're thinking about sustainable research, right? And so I want to stop there because I do want to make sure that we have time to kind of like wrap up our thoughts. And Erin, I also want to, you know, talk about like very specific kind of research projects that we've had. Do folks have questions right now? I see, Chris, I see you had something in the chat.
Yeah, I really, it was the third principle about intellectual property. I think I'd always kind of glanced over that and just thought about it very narrowly and with kind of a real capitalist frame, but the broader kind of idea of making sure that research products are fully accessible to all participants in the research process, that was really, really thought-provoking for me. And I would just, you know, much like Erin said, I'd just love to hear some more examples of how where you've seen that done well, the kinds of things that have made research products more accessible and available. Yeah, this one was really, really, really interesting to me.
Yeah, so, you know, we're definitely not perfect, right? And the reason why we have all these different things on there is because we've learned from mistakes and we continue to learn, right? And so one of my favorite kind of partnerships that we've developed over the years is actually one of the projects that I helped co-lead is our work with youth participatory science, youth participatory action-based research projects. And so basically it's a lot of different groups, right? So we have students involved, we have their teachers involved, we have professors involved, we have organizers involved. And all of these groups get together to develop curriculum that is very much tailored to specific communities, right? The students on the ground are the ones doing more community work, right? Ensuring that they're sharing and disseminating information that they're collecting, right? Because the students are the ones that are developing the data research plans. So like whether it's soil collecting, soil sampling, they're the ones that actually map out where to go get soil, right? Teachers have also invited them to think about different areas that are beautiful, ugly, and I'm not sure what the other prompt is, right? But it's inviting students to use their communities, right, as research, right, as a place of research and knowledge. And so it's very specific, right? This is very specific to like using a classroom and a network, right, of educators that are able to support. But there are ways, right, to kind of incorporate community research participants, community organizations as well. Again, at the very end of that kind of project, right, students actually present their work back to community in a kind of like a youth summit conference kind of style, where they share their research and everything. But they also yeah, and they also have translated, have created brochures, have done different, you know, ways of sharing the information that they've collected. And I think for us, the biggest thing in that has been like making sure that we don't have to, you know, ask people to pay for that, right? And so accessibility has been a big thing. We've also fronted the bill on like translating services, right? And so if there are opportunities to, in thinking about budgets, right? Thinking about what are some of the translation services that you're gonna need to make sure that it is accessible to people, right? Or even around, you know, do you need to have audiobooks now, right? Or an audio recording of the research nowadays, right? There's different ways that you can make it accessible, and, you know, doing that in the front end, right? When you're planning that budget, when you're planning how to collect data, right? Making sure that you're doing that in the front end so that at the end, it doesn't, you know, it's not totally impossible to make it even more accessible, I guess, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question, Chris.
It totally does. And it's just a lot of dimensions to think about there that I hadn't thought about. I'd also love to hear a little bit more about the MOA process and kind of how that goes or how that's gone in your experience. I'm just curious as to kind of what that even looks like. Full transparency, sort of thinking about what it would look like for Chicago Studies to implement something like that for students or researchers who want to utilize our resources to do community-based work. If we could kind of on the front end be like, yes, but this is the kind of research that we would be willing to support. And we're not willing to support research that doesn't keep these principles in mind. But that makes that like agreement setting process and the time it takes and the way it proceeds that much more important for me to understand.
Yeah, I think I personally haven't been, you know, in a space where we've needed a memorandum of agreement between parties. I know it can get really tricky. There's been instances where, you know, particularly with universities, right, that budgets are not like adequately, you know, distributed, right, where it'll be a really large grant and 80% of the budget is going to the university and only like 10% is going to actual staff time of like the organizers, which are usually the ones doing most of the work, right? And so stuff like that doesn't really make sense where, you know, again, usually universities have a lot of resources already. And it's more of like, and this is just from the organizational point of view, right? So I'm not exactly sure what it would look like for you all, but I know for us, when there is conflict, we're not, we don't shy away from the conflict, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going back and forth. It just means that we need to have a kind of like a refresh, right? What is it? What are our needs, right? What are your needs? What are some of the things that we can change? What are some of the things that we can't change, right? And even when we're thinking about research design, right, and having opportunities for people to be involved in the development of research is also can be tricky, right? Can be tricky in having people decide what the budget looks like, right? All of these things are a lot, and it does add time to your actual research project. And so I think that's another big thing that's helped us is like understanding what can be changed and what can't be changed, right? And then also, is there wiggle room for some of these things, right? Because very quickly when engaging in any research project, there could be misunderstandings, miscommunications, and again, like it's really difficult to want to work again, right, with people that maybe there was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, but there could always be feelings of like extraction, right? Because that is usually what research projects are. It's just an extractive process of getting knowledge, getting getting what researchers need, and not necessarily giving back. And so that's really where we come from, is like, how do we stop the extractive process and encourage more sustainable practices in research and with research, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that was amazing. I have one more question, but I'm gonna Tess, I'm not sure if you got something.
Yeah, one of my questions was just, I really like the use of the term sustainable research relationship. And from a student standpoint, say a student that's, starting their research up this summer, what are some things they should keep in mind of what does a sustainable research relationship look like to LVEJO?
Yeah, I think, I think if it's a student, right, definitely, I know it's hard and it could sound intimidating, right? But like meeting people, right? Getting to know people, getting to know people and getting to know the neighborhoods, depending on where students are, because there are so many different languages in the city, right? And different neighborhoods are segregated so much and in a very specific way that it would be almost irresponsible to have students in neighborhoods without giving them proper context and without giving them proper kind of history, right, on neighborhoods. But that also kind of invites them to, if there are different languages spoken at these neighborhoods, different cultural practices, different, cultural significant events, right? That also invites them to kind of be more intentional again, right? Be more intentional about that relationship building. Can they go to that event? Can they, it doesn't take very much to like download one of those little, translators on your phone, right? And so not being scared to do that, right? I know, speaking for myself, when I had to do some of these student projects, it was really scary to kind of just go out into neighborhoods that I've never been in and like get all this information, take pictures and all these things, right? But it really does help when you know the research that you're doing. Maybe having like an elevator pitch, which is what we call, right, an elevator pitch, really quick conversation starter on the research. What is it that they're doing there? If community members ask, right, and then how can they get more information? That's also really important. Like, okay, what happens after this, right? And I think that's part of the sustainable conversation is like, even after a publication or whatever, like what happens now, right? And like, do we get access to that? Can you share that? Can you come back and like just even have a conversation with the group, right? And I think it's just thinking about how to make those relationships more intentional, and not just extractive, if that makes sense.
Definitely, thank you. And then I think we have time for your one last question, Chris, if you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I did. I'm thinking about this idea of accountability and growth, and thinking. So LVEJO, y'all are organizers, but you are also an organization, and I'm curious how LVEJO as an organization keeps itself accountable to the residents and the communities for whom you're organizing, right? And with whom you're mediating. Because I think it's so easy for almost any organization or any structure, once it gets itself put into a position where resources are going through it, for example, it's easy for things to get a little detached, right, from the energy of the community or the needs of the community. How do you guys keep yourselves accountable?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Honestly, it's hard, right? Like it's not easy. Growth is never easy. Accountability is never easy. I think for us, it's really important to have a good team of people that are welcome to that, to that challenge, right? Having a team of leaders and directors that are not going to shy away from being held accountable. Again, right, from an organizer point of view, it's not always easy to say something when things aren't going the way that they should be, or when you notice that there's like a cycle of harm or a cycle of extractive harm, right, that needs to get addressed. But you're absolutely right, like internal work needs to be done, right? And so that's why I kept mentioning throughout the presentation that like self-transformation, self-reflection is so important to do, right? Because your team of leaders is only going to be as good as they are internally, right? And so another beautiful thing that I really love and appreciate about LVEJO is that we encourage people to go to therapy, right? We encourage therapy to be done during work hours. We encourage professional development, and that doesn't just have to look like professional development around the work, right? But like, what is it that you're interested in outside of work that you want to grow a little bit more about? And so like I said, it's not easy. I think with community members as well, anytime we're developing programs or campaigns, we try our best to kind of have different ways that they can be involved in the planning, and like what was I gonna say? Like in the planning of it, right? In the planning and implementation of it. So we've also had a really great kind of track record, and also, of like having young people, community members, start with us as volunteers, start with us as something, that doesn't take up too much time. And now they're full-time staff, right? And just people that have been with us for years now. And so it's really beautiful to kind of see that, because that's how you see the sustainability and the relationship growth, right? And again, like people wouldn't be there this long if they weren't inviting of the growth and the accountability, right? And I say that about some of my coworkers that have left throughout the years, right? Like some people just do not want to welcome that, and it takes a lot to be willing to change and do all of that. And so it's hard work. It's not easy. It's also not easy to kind of see these things in practice, right? And like it's a lot of internal work that we have to do, for sure.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Karen. This was so insightful, and I'm so excited to share it with students. I had so many asked for the recording already, so I'm excited to share it out. This is really insightful and helpful, especially for students that are just starting to think about their research going into their 3rd and 4th years. So just, thank you so much for joining us, and this was really helpful.
Sure. Thank you so much. I loved it. Like I said, it was the first time that I had to put something together, so I hope it was okay. And also, feel free to reach out and ask any other questions. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we talk soon.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you both so much. Have a good rest of your day.